Delusion, obsession, and dubious ethical choices all swirl around in this beautifully written, albeit a little bit strange, a little bit creepy book. Welcome everyone to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. The book reviews for those who want to transcend beyond their own mere mortality by learning something interesting, fun, exciting through the books that they're reading. My name's Kyron and I do these book reviews for those who want to get deep into the books. And I'll let you know now that this is going to be the start of a slightly new era for the book reviews, in which is we're going back to our old past. So I'm going to be doing a lot more free-form, longer book reviews, so I'll be looking down at my notes and I won't be cutting out and editing all the ums, ers, and likes and things like that, which I used to do. So just a little knowledge for you there. Today, we're looking at the book Lolita, written by Vladimir Nabokov. And so this book was written in 1955. It's about 300 pages in length. And it's a novel of delusion, obsession, and fantasy is how I would put it. So we follow the main character of Humbert Humbert. And I'll give some spoilers now because I feel like in this part here, I want to explain the timeline of the book, what's going on within it, and I'll need to get into some of the main details of the book. So Humbert Humbert is a Frenchman who is obsessed with Dolores Haze and who he calls Lolita. So that's where the name comes from. That's referring to this young girl. And so Humbert Humbert was in France, sort of had a unsuccessful marriage there, moves over to America, but he's always been obsessed with these things called Nymphets, or what he describes as Nymphets. And so these are girls primarily of the age of, I would say, 10 to 13. I'm not sure he puts a specific number on it, but it's around that age. So prepubescent, but bordering on going through puberty and becoming, I guess, sexually viable in terms of the evolutionary speaking terms. And he has this early love with a young girl, whilst he was of a very young age as well. So it was sort of normal. I think they were both around the 12 age. And he falls in love with her, and this just stays with him the rest of his life. He has this love of young girls, essentially. He finds them immensely sexually desirous. And he meets the mother of this young girl, Lolita, and he finds her pretty repellent. He's repelled by most women, although he does visit prostitutes and things like that, but only to try and, I guess, satisfy these cravings that he has. And he's a rather conflicted guy. He initially comes out knowing that it's sort of wrong, but wanting to protect the girls as well. So he resists his urges, I guess, if you want to put it that way. He meets the mother. The mother has an unfortunate accident, and he has sole care of Lolita. And they go on a big road trip, and this is when their sexual, amorous relationship starts. And this is where you can start to see the, I guess, gradual decline of his mental state and of his ability to recognize what is real and what is fantasy, what is obsession, what is delusion. They all mix up in his mind, and he goes from a rather conflicted, but you would say he was doing the honorable thing and stopping his desires and not fulfilling his desires for these young girls. And then he becomes a bit more depraved, I guess you would say. And so they end up settling in this place called Beardsley. They go for a second road trip after that, and then this is when Lolita is taken from him. She just disappears, and he goes through a couple of years of sort of madness in this haze of memories of just trying to get back to her, find out what happened. And after this 3-year delirious haze, he finally gets a letter from her, meets up with her again, and then acts his revenge on the person who took him away from her. And so that's the main plot line of the book. And then the main part of the book, the main essence, the learnings from the book, I guess, is his relationships to Lolita, how they behave, and so I guess even the mind state of his mind and how that declined. And so this was narrated, it's told in the form of a narration of the author from jail. So we start off with, I think it would say, the first 3 or 4 chapters of him sort of reminiscing of some things, and then it goes into the storyline as if told from him. So he's retelling his own story from reconstructed notes and whatnot. When we get a little bit deeper into the author, he's an amazing guy. Vladimir Nabokov is trilingual. So, and trilingual in the, I could say I'm semi-trilingual in that my Spanish is okay, I'm learning German, and English is obviously fine. But this guy was born in Russia, moved to, I believe it was Germany, but he learnt French to a very good degree, and then also English at the same time. But then I think he had some other languages. And so he could translate his own works, for example, and he would write in different works. So this was actually written in English originally, which is absolutely amazing considering English wasn't his native tongue, which is Russian, I guess you would say. Upon perusal, he had a really fascinating life. He moved all over the world. He did some amazing things. And then obviously this book is probably the most famous of his, and then also the most controversial because it's dealing with, I guess you'd call it pedophilia in the sense that it's a man interacting, having sexual intercourse with a young girl, and beneath the age of consent in pretty much everywhere in the world, which I'm just going to say is 16. So what are the themes of the book? Well, the first one, I guess, is Nymphets. So this is where sex meets controversy. And I think we'll start off with what is a nymphet. So he describes it, here we go, 9 to 14 years of age. She's not particularly a seductress from what I could tell. So even though there were some signs, I think, of that these girls were seducing him sexually, i.e. wearing revealing clothing, the way they would move, the way they would show off pieces of skin, selective pieces of skin to tantalize him and whatnot. I get the feeling that most of that was in his mind. I have argued with my dad about this, and he was saying it was more implying that these girls were being sexually seductive to him, because not every girl of the age 9 to 14 is a nymphette. There's only selected ones. And so I guess there's signs of sexuality. And this is where it gets strange, because it's like, okay, is he picking up on some signs that maybe these girls are, if they're in the 13, 14 range, and girls do hit puberty a lot younger than guys do. So there's probably some women, some girls who I won't use the word women, some girls who do hit puberty at the age of 12, maybe even 11, i.e. there are 11 and 12-year-olds who have had sex and have had babies, so obviously they've hit puberty. What is it that distinguishes them from their peers, and why does he only find some? So that's just one aspect of a nymphette, and basically he's enamored with these girls. So he'll see them, he'll be a sort of the lecherous old man looking at them on the street and wanting to have sex with them to fulfill his desires. And, I guess, how does a nymphette lover think? Or what is it that goes through his mind? So I hesitate to call him a pedophile, because I get the feeling that a nymphette is a girl who has hit puberty and therefore is able to have sex. So I wouldn't say it's pedophilia in the sense that, he's attracted to babies or 5-year-olds or girls who are unproductive, not able to reproduce. I think all of them have that quality of being a sexually viable mate in terms of evolutionary speaking, but with the cultural standards of the day. And so this was written in 1955. The storyline was set, I think, post-World War II, so let's just say 1950s in America. This, I guess, would say, off bounds. It's off limits. But it's not pedophilia per se, I would say. It's sort of in this weird grey area. Prepubescent, I guess, is what you'd call it. And he can't control his lust. The whole time he's just continually, it's all that dominates his mind. He has work, it doesn't matter to him. Like, his health doesn't matter to him. Relationships with other grown-ups and other people his age doesn't particularly matter. He plays chess with one guy, but this is just a guy from France who, it shows he doesn't care at all about these people. And he's just totally consumed by it. The whole book is him consumed with these feelings of lust and whatnot. And what does this result in? Well, I think eventually it results in him willing to do horrible things. So this is where he starts off at the book being... He cares. He cares that this person who he doesn't know, he could damage her. So you see this in the scene where he is not married the mother yet, but Dolores or Lolita sort of is playing with him, jokingly, and he sort of gets her on his lap, and she is sort of rubbing on his leg, and he is at this stage, immensely sexually excited by this, but then is also trying to preserve her innocence so that she doesn't realize that he is sexually excited by this. And so he does try and keep that away from him. But then if you look at the end of the book, what is it that he has done? And so by the end of the book, he's raped her, essentially. She claims he raped him. She instigated the sexual intercourse, but I would say he pushed it too far and did actually end up raping her. He has thoughts of incest, so he wants to impregnate her so that he can then have another Lolita, his own child, and then do the exact same thing. So he's obviously willing to have incest, to have sex with his own daughter, to in this imaginary situation. So he doesn't actually do it. Murder, so he's willing to murder someone. Battery, he hits Lolita at one point, so he assaults her, not sexually but physically as well. And then also kidnapping, which is the big one. He basically steals her right from the start of the book and takes her along. So it always it comes back to the Nymphets in the end. And in particular Lolita. So he has this unhealthy, I guess you would say, it's consuming his mind, these thoughts, these passions. And you notice this because the very first word of the book is Lolita, and the very last word of the book is also Lolita. So I think that talks a little bit about his mind state. He is just obsessed with this girl. But there's little guilt as well. When he does all of these things, he doesn't really feel guilty afterwards. I think he tries to justify it in saying, oh, she was asking for it. Oh, this guy stole her away from me. She was mine. She was always mine. She instigated it. All of these things, I think it ends up with him not being able to control his desires and the things that he wanted to avoid, which he did have some maybe like pre-guilt or some worries over at the start of the book. By the end of it, he's too far gone. He just doesn't care. So that's, I guess, one of the themes, Nymphets. The other is obsession. And so this is the breeding ground for delusion. And he starts off normal-ish. He's not a monster. He shows a lot of restraint. And it's just this gradual decline. He wants to shield her. Right at the start of the book, you see, he wants to shield her, wants to make things right. And you can really see this as well when he couldn't kill her mother. So he has the perfect opportunity to kill Charlotte, which is Lolita's mother. And everything is set up perfectly. He couldn't ask for a better situation. And all he has to do is drown her. It'll take a minute and he'll basically get off scot-free, and then he can have Lolita to himself. And he just can't do it. Everything is there. The moment is right. It's building up into this point, and he backs away. And so I think this really shows that right at the start of the book, even though he has this obsession, he's not consumed by it as of yet. He still has some moral boundaries that he's not willing to cross. He's not willing to do these certain things. And, this is even for a person he didn't particularly care for. The only reason he married her was to get closer to her daughter and things like this. And this is, I guess, when we start to see after the first third of the book, whereas the haze of amor, so love, and his growing problems, these start to just build up. I think it's a gradual build up. He doesn't snap instantly and go from having some moral boundaries to not having them. They start to blur, they start to haze. So he goes on this car trip and there's just outbursts. There's the outburst from Lolita. She's a young girl whose mother has died, whose whole world is transformed. She's now forced to live with this guy who's taking her on a road trip across America, and she has these emotional outbursts. And the obsessive control that results from this, where he basically wants her to be like a perfect young girl. He wants her only to himself, and so he restricts her ability to talk with anyone, basically, but especially men or young boys of the opposite sex. He is extremely controlling, and he takes her to a very strict private girls' school. He forces her to basically report in each and every day. He needs to know of her whereabouts, her movements. He doesn't allow her to fraternize with anyone. His one slight relaxation of the rules is to allow her to join in this play that is being constructed, and which she is really enjoying and whatnot. And I think all of this is what results in her escape. She can be under these conditions anymore. His obsessive control. He needs to have everything about her. She is only his. And this is where, you can see those maybe moral boundaries that he had at the start, they're slipping by this stage. He hits her at one stage because she disappears with her friend for a couple of hours, and she's being, a smart aleck about it, essentially. This then is when he goes into full-on delusion. So with small moments of lucidity. And this is where the mysterious trap appears. So basically, he realizes he's losing her, and so he decides, I'm going to go on another road trip with her. She's going to be confined to the car with me, to the room with me. She's not going to be able to escape or have any autonomy of her own. But they're followed by this mysterious guy in a car. And at the start, when it first starts happening, you're like, okay, he's just going crazy. There's no... Especially because the trap is, I believe, his cousin or a second cousin or something like that. And so it's someone who really has no bearing on the story. He's just invented this imaginary figure and put this person that he knows identity onto them. But at one stage, like, he goes into the hospital, he has a delirium, and she is just gone. Next thing you know, she has escaped with this mysterious person. And you're still wondering, at least I was still wondering, was this person even real at all? Like, because he would then, after this, go, and this is where you see his full delusion and obsession really peaking up. He's going to all of these motels that along this whole stretch of road that he used to stay on, and he would look for, the journal. It was back in the days when you would write your name in the lodger form, or, to say that you stayed here. And he would see all of these names, and he's like recognizing the handwriting. He's recognizing these really archaic anagrams of people's names, which then put together reference an obscure French poet from the 14th century or something like that. And you can see his mind is just devolving, essentially. He's not in control. Everything is going wrong. He goes through this 3-year haze of sort of like drugs, of hooking up with this other girl to help him forget about Lolita, but she's always on his mind. And then there's the reunion. So he meets her again, and he still is obsessed with her, and he says to her, if you come with me now, I will give you everything. I will give you the whole world. We will have the perfect life. By this age, she is 17. She's pregnant with another man's baby, and he still harbors this dream. But this is when I think the lucidity is starting to come in, and he starts recognizing certain things of how he's behaved, and I'll talk about more of those in the personal observations. And then the violent finale is when, okay, he's lost everything. He meets this guy, and this guy actually was a real person who stole her away. It ended up being the guy who wrote the play that she was performing in. And there's just an extremely violent scene right at the end of the book, which is why he is now in jail. So I guess we'll go on to the observations and takeaways now, which is, it seems semi-consensual until the end. So there was just these points of the book, and I would say the breaking points for this was chapters 29 to 32. So this is when he meets her for the final time, the reunion with her before he then murders this guy. And there's this period of him meeting her, talking with her, and then going to this guy's place to essentially murder him. And I would have said up until this point that it was semi-consensual. She was the one who instigated the sexual intercourse. She stayed with him all of this time. She had other opportunities to, any time of the book, she could have just gone to the authorities and said, this guy isn't my real father. he stole me away, he murdered my mother. He didn't murder her, but she could have said it and they would have believed it. And at any opportunity, she had the ability to escape. And she had that's a very powerful card to have in her deck. But she never used it. She stayed with him the whole time. And the way it was worded, the way she interacted with him, you got the feeling like there was some interest of her part to be with him. And this is where, the Nymphets comes into play as well. Was he obsessed with these girls who were actually showing some sexual signs towards him, that they wanted his attention and whatnot? Or was this all in his head? And I think when you get to this 29 to 32 part, this is where you go, nah, he made all of this up. At least this is how I came out of it. So if you go to page 264 of this particular version, you can see there that he broke her heart. So there was this he's trying to convince her to come back with him and he'll treat her well. And so there's this period here. So she says, "I'll die if you touch me," I said. "You are sure you are not sorry, this is him talking. "I'll die if you touch me," I said. "You are sure you are not coming with me? Is there no hope of your coming? Tell me only this." "No," she said. "No, honey, no." She had never called me honey before. "No," she said. "It is quite out of the question. I would sooner go back to Q. I mean," and this was the guy who stole her away. She groped for words. I supplied them mentally. "He broke my heart. You merely broke my life." And I think that, amongst with a couple of other portions of sentences where he acknowledges, "Oh, I did something really bad to her. I broke her in a way which could not be fixed. And it was my doing. She really didn't have any option, a choice in this whole matter." And she would have preferred, she admits, she would have preferred for an uncaring mum. Her mum was a total bitch to her. She had an very unhappy life before he entered into the scene. But even then, she acknowledges it would have been better with her because you have done something to me that can't be replaced, that broken me in a way that just won't ever be able to be fixed. Another one is the helpless look in the mirror. So there was one point where he sees her, I think it was during one of the road trips, and she's looking in the mirror, and the way she just looks at herself is filled with sort of, pity, disgust at her own self, with a helplessness, with an acknowledgement, I guess, that she's worth nothing, but that everything about her is wrong, that her whole life is destroyed. And I think there was a bit of a twist for me, that observation that, okay, maybe he's not 100% guilty. It's not black and white. It's maybe a little bit of gray in there. But then I would say after reading those chapters 29 to 32, that's when you go, okay, there's not much gray in this. He's done something really bad. He's broken her life, and nothing's really going to be able to fix it. Another one, which was, thankfully, there's not much erotica in the book. So there's a couple of scenes where it talks about their sexual intercourse, particularly the first time they have it. But it's not overly gross, I guess. Like, it's not in your face. It's not a book where a pedophile could maybe read it and really love it. It's sort of boring on the actual explicit terms. And so I think that was a good point on his part. And also I think it's indicative of the times, because he could only get this printed by, I believe when he initially wrote it, was printed by a particular book publishers which specialized in erotic novels and whatnot. So even though this isn't erotic per se, obviously with the themes of that sort of semi-pedophilia, I can see why people would have avoided this, particularly in 1953, whenever this was, they got the book deal. And then even to today, although you could argue with the things like 50 Shades of Grey and whatnot, that erotica is maybe a bit more mainstream now. It's not hidden under the covers. you can watch porn on the internet and everyone has access to that. It's not, sex is maybe not as taboo as it was back then, but it's still, it's still is. There's, I'm going to do some research after this to find out, how much controversy was there, maybe that I get for this own review, and that other people have done book reviews of this. Would be interesting. My final observation was there is an annoying amount of French in this book as well. It has these just certain scenes where he will switch to French for whatever reason. He's a French guy, so he'll have something like this. So this is the start of chapter 2 on chapter 2 of part 2. And so he says, now in perusing what follows, the reader should bear in mind not only the general circuit as adumbrated, that was another one. You're going to learn a fair few words in here which you might not have heard of before, with its many side trips and tourist traps, secondary circles and skittish deviations, but also the fact that far from being an indolent, and this is where the French comes in, partie de plaisir, our tour was a hard, twisted, teleological growth whose sole raison d'être, these French cliches are symptomatic, was to keep my compassion and passable humor from kiss to kiss. That is a pretty standard thing that you'll find within the book. And there was periods where he would have full sentences. So if it was just an individual word, raison d'être, or however you say that, you can sort of get away with not having it. Understanding the French is not essential to understanding the book, but there's enough in there that it's kind of annoying that you need, if you fully want to get it, you should get it. So I would recommend downloading the Google Translate, or at least a translation app, if you don't speak French, obviously, to hold the camera up to it and it can translate immediately from French into English. That was very helpful for me. And so whilst reading this book, I had my phone just beside myself the whole time. And if I came across a French word or numerous French words, I'd bring it up, look at them, and then just remember that for when I came to those sentences. So in summary, I would say don't be fooled by the general controversy. It is a rather mild book. So if, my impression coming into this was Lolita, it's going to talk a lot about pedophilia. It's going to be a real hard, I guess like ethically, morally, maybe even disgusting read. But there was barely hints of that sexual, that erotica that you might have thought would be in this. There's also barely hints of the consensual love, so it is rather condemning of Humbert in total, I would argue. Now, other people could have other observations. I believe the author himself, Nabokov, also said this afterwards, that for the most part he was trying to show that Humbert was a bad guy and that this wasn't a consensual man-child relationship. It was more, this guy's doing some bad, evil things, if you want to put it that way. The prose, the plot line, the style, they're all fantastic. It's a really, really well-written book. I really enjoyed how he created this, how he constructed it. Even the annoying bits of French do add something to it. And so I think it's just unclear enough to make you reread certain sections for additional clarity. So I think it's one of those books where your perceptions of what the characters are might change throughout. You can read a Harry Potter book and Harry Potter's the hero from the get-go, like he's the main dude. Whereas these ones, this type of book, I think you have to be willing to let your initial conceptions change with the flowing of the book, with the narrative, especially as it gets towards the end. So there's lots of provoking discussions to be had, and I'm giving it a very solid 7.5 out of 10. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I would highly recommend. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining me to this part of the video, my Mere Mortal Lights. What are your thoughts on Lolita? Have you read the book? Did you think was there any signs of consensuality between their relationship? Were you surprised, angered, disgusted by any of what was contained within? I'd love to know all of these things. Easiest way is obviously just to leave a comment down below. But also we have this available in the audio form as well. So if you are interested in listening to these book reviews and don't want to do it on the YouTube side of things, you can always just find Mere Mortals Book Reviews. I would suggest going to a new podcasting app, newpodcastapps.com, and try out one of them, because I also include some cool pictures and whatnot, which you can see within the chapters. Other than that, I really do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. Kyron out.